Well, thank you so much, Dr. Woods, and thank you to Bruce Shaw also, who is a new friend of mine in the past few years. He and I serve on the board at First Things together, and we're the representative Texans up there in New York City, and we have an important job to do in representing our great state. I teach at Baylor University, so I'm just down the road, and I feel like I'm speaking to a home audience. My son attends a Christian classical school in Waco called Live Oak, which is very much like Covenant, but a little bit smaller. So I know what you're up to here. I think it's wonderful, and I wholly support it. I'm going to give a lecture that parts of which I've given before for another First Things event, but it's a little bit of a different focus tonight. It has to do with, as the title says, the question of how achievement and the Christian life relate. And I'm going to start it by giving you a little background about myself, because I think it's relevant, and then I'm going to turn to some considerations about ways we might all think about achievement and the Christian life, and how those things go together and sometimes don't go together very well. I'll speak for about 40 minutes or so, and then we can have questions. I've been thinking about the issues that I'll address here tonight for almost actually exactly 25 years, since I lost my purpose in life at the ripe old age of 19. I was at that time a very serious musician, a person whose energies had been directed toward becoming a professional pianist. I'd been working toward this goal since I was about 5, winning state and local competitions, and generally, I hoped, getting closer to being the next Alfred Brendel or Bill Evans. I practiced many hours every day, appreciated praise from my peers and teachers immensely, and generally thought of myself, if I may say so, as someone who had something really special. I remember, I'm ashamed to say it, feeling slightly sorry for my peers who didn't have such talent or interest to distinguish them from the crowd. Have any of you had an interest like this? Athletics, writing, music, dance? At the end of my high school years, in the spring of 1990, I gave a glorious senior recital, half classical and half jazz, and saw myself going on to a similarly spectacular career in music, beginning at the Oberlin Conservatory in the fall of 1990. After all, wasn't that what all successful people do? They find their interest or talent, develop it, and then make a life of it. The problems of pride and self-absorption really hadn't yet entered my adolescent mind. It was then that I met my college piano teacher, a notable musician and longtime teacher at the conservatory, but not, let it be said, somebody who was overly warm or encouraging. I had remembered my former piano teachers with love and affection, but Mr. Schwartz was neither warm toward me nor particularly enthusiastic about my talents. I was a member of his incoming studio, and I probably ranked around the middle of that incoming class. He had an hour for me each week, and that was it. And during that first semester, I began slowly to realize both that my love for the piano was less noble than I thought, and that there existed a world of experience outside the practice room, so many interesting things to do and study that I'd been entirely unaware of, because of my intense focus on this one activity. And so, as I alluded to above, I began to lose my purpose in life. Now, why do I begin with my own story? I begin with it because I think it is in many ways typical of the way we are taught to be in contemporary America, and it exemplifies both the virtues and the vices of the achievement culture. First, the virtues. I was extremely disciplined. I could accomplish things. I could look forward toward goals and not just immediate pleasures. I was, moreover, and still am, profoundly drawn toward the excellence I saw in really great artists. And I did want it for myself, to own that excellence, to exhibit it, and to reproduce it. I wanted to do something significant and great. Isn't something like this what we often say we want for our children and our students? To transcend ordinary desires in order to see the various excellences that exist in the world, and if possible, then to do those things ourselves. To go to great schools, study abroad, pursue excellence in sports, music, dance, philosophy, equestrianism, gymnastics. The list can be expanded infinitely. Now the vices. I was full of youthful pride and constantly aware of other people's talents and how they compared to me. If they were not as good, then I didn't worry about them. If they were better, they were threats. Other people were then arranged in rank order in my mind and judged on one scale, their musical ability. I was extraordinarily focused on myself and on developing my talents. And as I said earlier, I secretly pitied others who hadn't found their special thing. So as a result, I was somewhat or perhaps very self-centered. Have we ever known other people like this? Do we inadvertently sometimes encourage it in our own children and our students in pushing them to be better and better? A laudable goal, this would seem, but perhaps more dangerous than we often acknowledge. Is it necessary for achieving great things? This is one of the issues I want to consider tonight. Now, some of you will have read David Brooks' recent book, The Road to Character, where he borrows categories from another excellent book called The Lonely Man of Faith. And those categories, for his purposes and ours, are the Adam 1 and Adam 2. And if you've read the book, you'll resonate with this. Adam 1 is the external resume-building person. Adam 2, this is in Brooks' words, introspective, thoughtful person in pursuit of ultimate meaning. Brooks' description of Adam 2 captures precisely the pathologies of achievement that I've begun to allude to in my own story. Here's Brooks. I read a short quote from his book. If you are only Adam 1, you turn into a shrewd animal, a crafty, self-preserving creature who is adept at playing the game. You spend a lot of time cultivating professional skills. Years pass and the deepest parts of yourself go unexplored and unstructured. You find yourself doing things that other people approve of, whether or not these things are right for you. You foolishly judge other people by their abilities, not by their worth. And he goes on in this vein. This kind of judging oneself, this is me again, not Brooks, begins to build in us a spirit of competition and comparison, and it can yield a host of pathologies, a constant attentiveness to work, to email, to social media, to one's job, to one's body, to one's diet, to incessant evaluation of ourselves and of others, all at the expense of paying attention to those around us whom we actually do love. I worry about this almost every day with my own children and with my students at Baylor. Every semester, for instance, I have multiple conversations with young people who have usually one of two worries. The first is that they haven't found their purpose in life and need to find it, as if it's something you just wake up one day and discover, but somehow they have this notion that they will. Or two, they're more like me, and they have found they lost the purpose they thought they had coming into college. Say they failed chemistry and realized that their lifelong dream of becoming a doctor isn't right for them, or that they had thought they wanted to go into business, but they hate business and economics. But they see, like me, that our culture has an intense focus on achievement as a way of being, and they must emulate this. They too have to find the things they're good at: the soccer, music, math, gymnastics, and so on. They've usually endured the SAT prep classes, which set up the college entrance application competition, which is in turn a preparation for the GRE or the MCAT or the LSAT, which then sets up the competition for law and medical schools. All of this, in turn, sets up the competition for residencies and clerkships, and then at last for plum jobs. It is a constant chasing of future satisfactions. And at the end of it comes the pinnacle, often, I'm sorry to say, the reward of no longer knowing what is really valuable in life. This is what Brooks is so keen to emphasize in his book, forgetting the true meaning of leisure and being incapable or significantly handicapped in our abilities or in our capacities for enjoyment and happiness. None of this is even to mention the mental illness that often develops among high achievers. Witness the tremendous increase in anxiety and depression among millennials and even those younger. The sense of never being good enough, the sometimes paralyzing fear of disappointing parents and teachers, and the way the search for achievement after achievement can actually prevent the introspection required to identify a true calling. This reminds me of one of my professors in graduate school who has been extremely successful to judge by externals. He said, well, he spent nearly 20 years publishing articles in all the most prestigious journals. And yet he confessed to a colleague recently, I look back and wonder why I've done all this work. It all seems utterly meaningless. What I've been describing is achievement understood in its most negative sense. But it is a view of achievement many of us may have some understanding of. My favorite writer, the political philosopher Michael Oakeshott, says this about achievement. He says, achievement is the diabolical element in human life. And the symbol of our vulgarization of human life is our near exclusive concern with achievements. He thought a lot about this. He thought a lot about achievement, what it means, what it doesn't mean. He put it elsewhere in an essay that I read actually when I was 19 and falling away from my focus on the piano. He said this, The future is the Moloch to which the present is sacrificed. And the life which leaves behind it actual accomplishments is valued more highly than that which strove to be its own achievement. With this belief goes also the notion that a career is the main end of life, for a career is the only evidence a man has of external accomplishment. The safe way is pursued, prudence is made a virtue, and for the sake of an hypothetical old man who may bear his name 30 years hence, the young man hoards his energies and restrains his activities. In other words, this person, who he calls the worldly man, pursues achievement for its own sake in the hope of making money, gaining honor, or leaving a reputation. This is not going to be an entirely negative talk, so let me make a turn here. I do feel positively certain, and especially so having chatted with your headmaster and other administrators and teachers here at this school, that you have an experience of achievement that is not wholly negative, a categorically different understanding of achievement. Or not of achievement, of a way to live. For Christians, this is commonly expressed as the love of God and love of neighbor. Love or care, caritas, care for others. This kind of experience constitutes us as parents, daughters, sons, teachers, pastors, counselors, husbands, wives, friends. In these relationships, we are concerned with the good of others, not of ourselves, and we would gladly sacrifice for others. Our love is pure and noble, informed by reason, but not always necessarily reasonable, and virtuous actions naturally flow from it. I personally discovered this in the most vivid way when I became a mother, where I saw that the goal is not the mother or father's well-being, but the flourishing of the child. But of course, this inclination can manifest in lots of different modes: in care for a neighbor or an elderly relative, in relinquishing personal benefit in various ways, in undergoing pain or suffering on someone else's behalf. I'll have more to say about this in a few minutes when I turn to several ways that I think that internalizing Christian teachings about the human condition may actually help us to think properly about achievement. So one of the questions I asked tonight is, can these two orientations, or what for convenience I'll call love and achievement, can they be brought together? How is it that we so often recognize the priority of the one, love, while continuously and relentlessly being pulled back toward the achievement? After all, the realm of love would seem to be unambiguously morally good, while the achievement realm seems questionable at best, pride-filled and soul-killing at worst. But is there a way of living life as a Christian that also puts achievement in its proper place? Because for all the pathologies I've just been describing in the achievement culture, most of us know and feel deeply that renouncing the impulse toward achievement is an artificial and unsatisfactory solution. And this is because, as I believe with Aristotle and many others, real and long-lasting happiness consists in purposeful activity, not rest or pleasure. Human beings carry within themselves a great desire to do something meaningful, and though this desire takes a wide variety of forms in practice, at the very least it requires discipline, hard work, investment, patience. Also, it requires confidence, and even at times, self-promotion. I want to give you an example of a literary illustration of what I'm calling these conflicting poles. The Greek hero Odysseus. I'm aware that you read great books here, so maybe the students have read the Odyssey recently. When we first see Odysseus, he is marooned on an island with the eternally youthful and attractive nymph Calypso. All his needs are amply provided. Calypso serves him limitless food and drink and offers him all sorts of physical pleasures. But instead of reveling in the enjoyment, Odysseus sits, quote, on the rocky shore, breaking his heart groaning, with eyes wet, scanning the bare horizon of the sea. We are meant, of course, to wonder why this hero is so miserable. I would say it's because he possesses at that moment in the story neither love nor the possibility for achievement. He wants to be reunited with his wife and his son. But just as strongly, he wants an arena in which he can act meaningfully and do things, perform acts of valor or honor or excellence or kindness. In this way, we're all like Odysseus. Now, lest you think I'm just harking back to a condition that doesn't exist any longer, and I don't think any of you think that, perhaps, I would point out the enormous quantity of contemporary literature there is out there talking about these issues. how to reconcile conflicting orientations. The subtext of a lot of it, or maybe most or all of it, is the question of happiness. And the major thesis of the genre is, if we could just get the balance right, then human fulfillment would be ours. If we could make the achievement piece and the love piece fit together well, then we'd be happy. Those of you who are women maybe follow this literature in the women's world. There's a ton of literature about this topic, but I've often observed that it's just as much a man's problem as a woman's. It affects anyone who feels driven both toward achievement and yet disappointed by the promised satisfactions of all that investment of time and energy. It bothers all of us who recognize that another mode of experience appears to be more meaningful than the things we spend so many hours of our day engaged in. And so we're offered books about balance and about relaxation and about living in the zone and embracing imperfection and being good enough and allowing your home to be messy. If, for example, we should happen to be a woman under about the age of 45 or so and a mother, we're informed by countless blogs that we should enjoy the moment, live life in the midst of scattered Legos and disarray, and renounce the quest for perfection in all areas of life. But I don't think these difficulties can be wished away, or that they can be resolved by renouncing our desires to achieve, to do, and to make, and to create. The tension also can't be resolved by deciding in favor of only achievement. For sooner or later, and probably sooner, we would find, I think, that the desire to love and be loved is absolutely fundamental to being human. Most of us recognize that pretty clearly. And again, to quote Aristotle, without friends, no one would choose to live, though he had all other goods. I also think that the answer doesn't lie in finding some sort of balance. Because I've come to think that the conflict between love and achievement is, in one sense, a permanent one, a non-negotiable part of the human condition. So given all this, I think a better way to understand ourselves and to see why we are pulled in such conflicting directions is to examine what we really are aiming at in all our purposeful, determined activity in the service of accomplishment. Can we find some way of thinking about the desire to do meaningful work, to accomplish things, that does not fall into the pathologies that I've been describing at the beginning of this talk? So I'm going to suggest another way of looking at achievement. I'm going to talk about sort of four things here. I'm interested in examining how we got here. I don't know about you all, but it certainly seems to be the case that people of, say, my grandparents' generation weren't obsessed with achievement, and especially women. How do we get to be in the place we are right now? So this is not the subject of my talk, but I find it very interesting to try to trace the genealogy of how we got here. I have a short suggestion about, or an explanation for how we got here, which I'll share with you in a minute. But this is a real question to me. I think we would do well, and this is my first point, to understand the origins of this mentality. Like I said, this is a task for another essay, but I can at least give you a little sketch of where we might start. Surely some of our present situation is due to the hyper self-consciousness that media, and particularly social media, has helped create over the very recent past. We are all now intensely aware of how we appear, both to ourselves and others, and we constantly, if subtly, seek to outdo others and ourselves. We ate this food, took this trip, won this award, have these adorable children. Anyone who is on Facebook knows exactly what I'm talking about. Yet there are also deeper, longer-term historical and cultural forces at work here. Some of this was diagnosed a really long time ago. There was a 1948 Gifford lecture by Emil Brunner entitled Christianity and Civilization, and he makes a lot of interesting arguments, but to summarize, he maintained that the West's emancipation from Christianity and the concurrent rise of Romanticism and the cult of creative genius had transformed individual effort and productivity into the real measure of human worth. Here's Brunner. In 19th century Romanticism, the creative spirit becomes a substitute for religion, as well as for morality. Productivity becomes in itself the meaning and principle of life. The meaning and principle of life. Our value as human beings, then, is no longer bound up with being created in the image of God, but rather in becoming autonomous creators ourselves. And all of this, Brunner thought, and I think he's probably right, trickles down from the immensely gifted to all of us. Let me read you a rather more lengthy quote that makes this case. Once the belief is established that productivity is the meaning of human life, none can prevent this point of view being transferred to the lower regions of human production, especially since it is only a minority of people who are capable of taking part actively or receptively in art and science, at least in the sense of a passionate interest or a total self-abandonment. The slogan of productivity being the true meaning of life directs the large majority of men to another field, a field of production which is in closer connection with everyday exigencies and interests, namely the field of mechanical or technical invention in the service of economic production. It corresponds to a materialist, quantitative conception of life by which the technical inventor becomes the adored symbol of creativity, and new machinery is the measure of progress. Think of how prescient this was in 1948. And he goes on to talk about Edison, but we would have our own substitute names, Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and all these people that we idolize in present culture. Here's the second point. So I was looking back sort of historically, where does this desire to achieve come from? But you can also look personally, look into your own soul and say, well, why do I feel this intense desire to achieve? Well, there are a number of reasons, and it's going to be different for each person, but the common ones are these: for power, for money, or for honor. I can't tell you how many times I have students come to me and say, at Baylor, and say, well, I want to go to law school. Well, why? Do you like the law? I think so. I've never had a class in law. My dad's a lawyer, and he thinks I should be a lawyer, and it seems like a good job. And I said, well, that's not a reason. But it's just thought to be the thing you do. They see it as a way of gaining an employment that is honorable and lucrative. Okay, another reason, because we're insecure, from a sense that our lives have no value until we show what it is that we can do. I see this increasingly in kids, maybe not at the Covenant School, but in lots of schools. They got to figure out what it is that makes them different. What am I going to do to distinguish myself? Sometimes accomplishments and even the quest for accomplishment do provide a kind of purpose alone, but also with others. Often we seek and find a sense of mission within a group identity, like a band or a sports team, or as we see often now in an ideological or social movement. So those are all kind of negative understandings of why we want to achieve. So let me give you a positive one. And I hope this is how it is for you. The desire to achieve or to excel emerges not from a desire for money, power, or out of insecurity or unhappiness or need for solidarity, but as a result of the vision of a good or perfection that works upon us and which we respond to in turn. In perceiving excellence in others and in the works that others create, we glimpse the transcendentals, and here I'm paraphrasing Jacques Maritain, of truth, goodness, and beauty. We may even discover that we too desire to do, to make, and to create in our turn, and in whatever way we can, and to the extent we can, to do them perfectly. What exactly do I mean? We've all had our own experiences of these kinds of things, and they occur in different ways to different people. By way of illustration, let me quote another mostly forgotten writer, L.P. Jacks, writing in a book in the 1920s called Constructive Citizenship. And he says this: our real interest in truth, beauty, and goodness does not begin until we are on the way to creating one or another of them. Show me a man who is doing a piece of honest work, or one who is making something beautiful that might have been made ugly, and I know beyond a doubt that the eternal values have laid hold of that man. He may be governing a state, or steering a ship, or writing a book, or composing a sonnet, or laying bricks, but in any case, the root of the matter is in him. The eternal values are not beautiful phantoms, they are the active principles of human labor. Not to rest content until our trusteeship of matter has got itself outwardly expressed in things true, good, and beautiful for the eye to see, the ear to hear, the touch to handle, the whole man to rejoice in and make use of. Not to rest content till by our creative activity we have added one more to the world's inheritance of such things. That is the culture that goes through with its task, the wisdom that completes itself in skill. I think that's a beautiful passage explaining what many of us see in our reasons for work. It describes just what I'm referring to in the glimpses we all have in various realms of beauty, proficiency, and excellence. I personally have this experience with music, as is probably not a surprise. Listening to Glenn Gould play Bach, I hear genius in both the composer and the performer. It is to me beautiful and perfect. Others have this experience with poetry. Others see it in prose, as my colleague Alan Jacobs at Baylor pointed out to me recently. He and I taught a class together I know he was here to speak not long ago. We taught a class in modern intellectual history, and we read, well, it wasn't just history, it was novels, everything. We read George Eliot's Middlemarch, and he pointed out the last few lines of that book, which are sublime, and I'll read them to you here. He said, "These move me." And he's describing, Eliot is describing the main character, Dorothea, who, if you've read the book, you know she's the heroine. And she starts out, she's a very good illustration of this achievement mentality. She marries Casaubon thinking, I want to become the wife of a famous man and accomplish great things with him. By the end of the book, she's no longer married to that man, but she's married to someone she actually loves. And she realizes that her aspirations are perhaps not what she thought they were when she was young. So this is describing her at the end of the book. Dorothea's finely touched spirit still had its fine issues, though they were not widely visible. Her full nature, like that river of which Cyrus broke the strength, spent itself in channels which had no great name on the earth. But the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive. For the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. So Alan Jacobs pointed that out to me. It's stuck with me ever since, and it's absolutely beautiful prose, but it's a beautiful idea as well. The list will be different for you. I can see people finding this beauty and excellence in nature, of course. I'm even told it's there in computer coding, about which I know nothing. It's there in a Platonic dialogue, in a perfectly executed essay, in certain gardens, in cathedrals in Europe, 17th century Dutch still lifes, and the Roman Colosseum. You would certainly have your own list. The things that touch us like this tend to be inspirational, formative, and compelling. We want not only to perceive and appreciate them, but to engage in the activities they exemplify: architecture, writing, cooking, painting, musicianship, scholarship. As Emil Brunner has also observed, this time much more positively about achievement, these creative powers are the gifts of God, and therefore good. Only their misuse is bad. I would suggest that in this approach to achievement, we are not simply obeying the diktats of the world, be productive, but are motivated by love and desire for the work itself. This is not a new or original insight, and yet it bears repeating, because we continually forget it, or perhaps have never imagined it as a possible attitude at all. Here is Dorothy Sayers, for instance, writing during the Second World War about the proper attitude toward work. It should, she says, in fact, be thought of as a creative activity undertaken for the love of the work itself, and that man, made in God's image, should make things as God makes them for the sake of doing well a thing that is well worth doing. It is exactly what Dana Gioia has described in First Things in the following way for writers. He says this: all writers must master the craft of literature, the possibilities of language, the examples of tradition, and then match that learning with a personal drive for perfection and innovation. I had the opportunity to hear Dana Gioia read his poetry at a First Things event, and I came away from that thinking, that is perfection. His poetry, his presentation, his mind, wow. It was one of those experiences for me. Okay, so here's my third point. It has to do with how we think about achievement. So far, I've really been talking about the origins of the desire to achieve. They may be base or noble, concerned with money, honor, or impressing other people, or with what I've just been describing, truth, goodness, and virtue, in whatever ways these come to us in the material world. But there's something else to be said about achievement, or more to the point, about the way we think about achievement. And this is that whatever the motivation, base or noble, there's liberation in recognizing and fully seeing that our accomplishments, whatever they are never entirely self-generated. This, I believe, is underappreciated in our present culture, where the greatest admiration is usually reserved for those who are independent and self-made. Although I believe it is at root a Christian insight, because where but from God did we get these talents, one need not even be a Christian to affirm that we're born with a distinct set of abilities and talents that we can take little credit for possessing. If, for example, you have a talent for writing, then you begin with something you did not self-consciously cultivate. It was rather given to you. In becoming a parent, a mother or father, you allowed yourself to be the vessel or channel through which a very great thing was indeed created, but you didn't exactly create it yourself. And this, I believe, is the way all the best things come about. When we see ourselves as co-creators, as caretakers, as cultivators, then we're finally freed from the burdensome assumptions that go with the compulsive achievement mentality I've been talking about. That is really all about us, about our relentless and determined effort. To wit, the compulsive achievement views his accomplishments as the entire measure of his worth, upon which his entire value depends. He feels fully responsible for those accomplishments, for good or ill. No wonder so many of us work so hard to be excellent. At the extremes, this attitude tends to produce either intense anxiety or intolerable pride. I expect we all know people on both ends of this spectrum. In the academic world, which I can speak to, at one extreme, it's the young woman who can't get over her self-doubt to finish her PhD coursework. At the other extreme, it's the senior scholar who can't talk about anything but himself and his impressive publishing record. But by contrast, if we can manage to see ourselves as curators and caretakers, whose job it is to develop and nurture what has been given as a gift, then while the pressure isn't off, it is lessened, or better, its character has been changed. It is as if we live in a house that is far grander than we could have ever built on our own, and yet out of love and appreciation for the unearned gift, we want to preserve it and make it better, even more beautiful. Now, does what I've been saying counsel a total abandonment of self and the self's desire to achieve, the kind of abandonment we experience at certain moments in self-sacrificial love for others? Does it collapse the distinction I've been trying to make between love and achievement? I don't think so, or at least not always. If we are co-creators, as I think we are still selves. And if we're not selfish or self-obsessed, we still must be aware, introspective, and thoughtful about how we might best spend our time and use the gifts we do possess. This has always been the aim of liberal education, to see ourselves in the reflection of many different kinds of lives, weighing the relative attractiveness of courage, wisdom, and magnanimity against their opposites, and thinking about how we personally might embody such characteristics. But if we can manage to believe that the entirety of our achievement does not solely rest upon our efforts, then our orientation in achievement is diverted from such worldly ideas as becoming famous or being the best toward figuring out how best can I develop the talents I have been given. I've always found the 1 Corinthians 12 passage about the different gifts of the Spirit, as analogous to the parts of the body, to be immensely helpful here. One key to happiness, then, is managing to discover what it is that your gifts are, and then finding the courage and persistence to develop them through hard work, practice, patience, discipline. Doing this, I believe, is crucial to a happy life. 4.4. So far, I've been arguing that there is a common secular way of understanding achievement, which is intensely self-focused. It's the world of the meritocracy of credentialing, and it does promise a certain happiness. But it is a limited kind of happiness, and it can never be stable or permanent. It is what a student feels for a few days after final exams. I'm finished. But soon the mind turns to the next semester, and all the triumph of the past accomplishment fades away completely. It's gone. I've proposed instead that we come to think of achievement not so much as the whole measure of a person, as the world encourages us to do, but as the experience of being drawn to something one loves or finds beautiful or valuable. Yet sometimes, in certain kinds of work, there's actually congruence with what I have called that other orientation toward love and self-sacrifice. Here, the thing that draws us to an activity is not so much a transcendental as a person or group of persons. The true teacher finds her reward not in honor or salary, but in the students whose lives she touches. The missionary wishes for an achievement that actually consists in love. The doctor or therapist wants the betterment and flourishing of his patients. This is the love of neighbor we are commanded to engage in the second great commandment. There is even a way in which any kind of occupation or vocation may in the end draw on and express love. To the extent that one becomes skilled or advanced in anything, he or she gains the power to influence and to encourage those who follow. Thus, we all look for the approval of those we admire. The opinions of our teachers and mentors are of extraordinary value to us, and we care deeply about what they think. In the same way, as we eventually become the teachers and mentors, we should see, amazing as it seems to us at times, that others will care deeply about what we think of them. And then it is in our power to do enormously beneficial works of love, to encourage, to criticize, to help, to mentor, to reassure, to warn, and simply to watch. This is particularly directed toward all the teachers here. As you well know already, you are givers of love and approval, of validation and care, and not just to children and students, but to your coworkers, your fellow parishioners, your neighbors, your friends. In the world of college level academics, for example, the greatest kindness one person can do another is to read their work. I mean, nobody does this. We're all too busy. Nobody ever reads our colleagues' work. But that is a great thing to do. And then to talk with them about it. To the extent that we academics feel vocationally called to write and think, we want others to see what we're writing and thinking, and frankly, to find it good. This is ultimately to use one's gifts not just for oneself, but for others, to recognize others where you can, to encourage them in their achievements. This is to love them. It is seeing others as they wish to be seen, not asking them to pay attention to you, but you're paying attention to them. So to conclude, sounds now almost as if the problem has been solved, that achievement can be neatly folded into our understanding of ourselves as oriented essentially toward others and toward loving our neighbor as ourselves. And I think that is probably true, but not the whole story. Because while it may be right to say that the transcendentals of truth, beauty, and goodness in material form may draw us, nevertheless our efforts still take place in space and time. As finite creatures, we constantly make choices about what to do within the span of each day. And so the thousands of hours of practice or research required for excellence in music or philology or figure skating are thousands of hours not spent with husband, children, at church, or in direct service of others. And we do and must, in those hours, prioritize our own skills, our own abilities, and the work itself. After all, even those whose ultimate reward lies in the good of others, even missionaries and teachers and priests, must be effective and competent and skilled if they're going to accomplish what they set out to do. Worldly knowledge and expertise are simply required in all professions, from the investment banker to the social worker. These attributes must be cultivated over weeks, months, and years, and sometimes it will be absolutely necessary to promote oneself, to think strategically about advantages and opportunities, and to be a savvy political operator. But I think there are ultimately two ways of thinking about the conflict we sometimes feel. One is simply to recognize and to mark the discontinuity between what I'm calling the love and the achievement orientations. It has been a relief for me personally to realize that there's no balancing them out or wishing them away or rolling them together in a kind of life that is wholly coherent, as our chirpy self-help books promise to do. Because opportunity cost exists in every activity. This, I believe, is the problem with almost all the contemporary literature about this, a search for balance. It exemplifies a utopianism that seeks political solutions for problems that are ultimately not political problems. Fundamentally, these are problems of human nature, small problems like human finitude and the fact of death. No amount of sharing household tasks or funding government-run daycare can console us in the face of what Gerard Manley Hopkins has poetically expressed as, "Man is time's eunuch. He does not breed one work that wakes." The second way of thinking about the conflict involves both the difficult task of checking our own pride, remembering our own littleness, and yet at the same time thinking about the future. If many of us find it hard to be hopeful, say, about the immediate future of political culture in the United States, we should remember our Augustine. It should be no surprise to us that earthly politics are imbued with sin, or that questionable people sometimes attain high office and great honors. But we shouldn't wring our hands, but instead redouble our efforts not to win the culture wars, but to cultivate our own gardens, to preserve the traditions we've inherited, to cultivate the now countercultural ways of conserving what is valuable in a revolutionary age. I said at the beginning of this talk that I had lost my purpose in life at 19, but I have come to think that losing a false purpose or an incomplete purpose was a blessing, beginning of a real search for meaning that was not merely a child's dream of worldly success. I cannot right now or right here formulate for you what my life is for, but I do know quite certainly that it is not oriented toward the empty achievement that I thought I valued when I was 19. So let me leave you with two quotes that are not me, but wiser people than me. I think we would do well to remember with Paul, and as he writes in 1 Corinthians, that it is God who provides growth. Let me read you a short passage from this. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. And I'll leave you with my favorite line. Bill Murkison will know this well from the Rite One Anglican liturgy, the post-communion prayer, which is a beautiful prayer all the way through. But there's one line in particular that talks about the good works that God has prepared for us to walk in. It goes like this: "And we humbly beseech thee, O heavenly Father, so to assist us with thy grace, that we may continue in that holy fellowship and do all such good works as thou hast prepared for us to walk in. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, to whom with thee and the Holy Ghost be all honor and glory, world without end." Thank you. And I'll take any questions.